The trendy restaurant charged $47 for what they called deconstructed gyrofoam with truffle-infused tzatziki air. And Charlie was about to lose his mind on camera. Welcome back to another journey with Charlie's Bedtime Stories, where tonight we're diving fork first into ancient Athens to discover what the Greeks really ate, and spoiler alert, it wasn't baklava. Our hero Charlie, a food vlogger with strong opinions and zero patience for pretentious fusion cuisine, is about to get exactly what he wished for: a taste of authentic ancient Greek food. But as you'll soon discover, be very careful what you wish for, especially when cursed amphores are involved. Charlie held up his fork to the camera, a single microscopic piece of lamb suspended in what appeared to be flavored air. I'd give anything to know what ancient Greeks actually ate, he declared with the confidence of someone who has never met a vengeful time-traveling artifact. Because I guarantee you, it wasn't this overpriced science experiment. His followers loved his rants about authenticity, but sitting in that upscale restaurant with its exposed brick and Edison bulbs, surrounded by people taking photos of foam, Charlie genuinely wondered what real Greek food tasted like 3,000 years ago. The video went viral by morning, racking up 2 million views and hundreds of comments debating historical cuisine. What Charlie didn't know was that the universe has a dark sense of humor, especially when it comes to cocky food bloggers who make wishes they don't really mean. While hunting for vintage props in a dusty antique shop, Charlie spotted the amphora tucked behind a collection of fake Roman coins and suspiciously clean ancient oil lamps. The clay vessel was cracked, faded, and covered in symbols he didn't recognize, which made it perfect for his aesthetic. The elderly shopkeeper appeared from nowhere, as they always do in these situations, and warned him with theatrical seriousness that this particular amphora was special. Charlie smiled politely, paid the surprisingly low price, and reached out to grab his new prop. The moment his fingers touched the ancient clay, the world tilted sideways. Colors bled together like watercolors in rain. The floor dropped away, and Charlie felt himself being pulled backward through time itself, his stomach doing somersaults that would make Dionysus dizzy. When everything finally stopped spinning and his vision cleared, Charlie found himself standing in blazing Mediterranean sunshine, surrounded by people in actual togas, staring at his sneakers, jeans, and the camera equipment clutched in his trembling hands. A kind-faced Athenian woman with silver-streaked hair approached Charlie with a welcoming smile and offered him breakfast: a dense, circular barley cake called maza, and a cup of wine mixed with water. Charlie's excitement at successful time travel evaporated faster than morning dew under the Greek sun. Where was the moussaka, the souvlaki, the feta cheese drizzled with honey that every Greek restaurant in his neighborhood served? Instead, he held what felt like a hockey puck made of compressed sadness. He bit into the maza politely, trying not to let his face betray him. But his expression must have said everything, because the woman patted his arm sympathetically. The barley cake was dry, dense, flavorless, and required aggressive chewing just to break it down enough to swallow. The wine-water mixture helped, at least, washing down the grainy texture. Charlie realized with creeping horror that this wasn't just one weird meal. This was probably what most ancient Greeks ate every single day. His viral video about authenticity suddenly felt like a cosmic joke at his expense. At the bustling Agora marketplace, surrounded by merchants selling olive oil, dried fish, and ceramic pottery, Charlie confidently attempted to order familiar dishes. I'll take a gyro, some spanakopita pita, and definitely some baklava, he announced in modern English, speaking slowly and loudly as if volume would bridge the 25th century language gap. The merchants exchanged bewildered glances, some leaning in closer as if he was speaking a foreign dialect, others backing away slightly in case sun madness was contagious. One helpful pottery seller offered him some salted fish and a handful of olives, clearly doing his best to interpret Charlie's increasingly desperate hand gestures. When Charlie tried to mime a vertical spit with rotating meat, moving his hands in circles and making what he thought were sheep noises, a small crowd gathered to watch what they assumed was some kind of interpretive performance art. A child asked his mother if the strange man was a traveling entertainer. Charlie's cheeks burned as red as a ripe pomegranate while the crowd applauded his dance. A wealthy citizen named Callias, intrigued by Charlie's bizarre clothing and the mysterious black rectangle he kept talking to, extended an invitation to an evening symposium at his home. Charlie accepted immediately, visions of abundant Mediterranean feasts, dancing in his head surely the rich ate better than dry barley cakes. He arrived at Callias's beautiful house as the sun set, the walls painted with scenes of athletes and gods, and reclined on an elegant couch alongside philosophers, politicians, and poets. But when the servants brought out the food, Charlie's heart sank for the third time that day. Tiny portions of bread, modest amounts of cheese, a handful of olives, some dried figs, and small pieces of fish arranged beautifully but sparingly on simple plates. This was it. This was the feast. However, the wine flowed like a river, cup after cup after cup, diluted with water but still potent. Charlie watched in fascination as the evening's intellectual philosophical debates about virtue and knowledge gradually dissolved into slurred singing, passionate arguments about whether fish could feel happiness, and at least one guest declaring himself to be the reincarnation of a sea turtle. Determined to prove his worth, and perhaps improve his dining situation, Charlie volunteered to help prepare a meal at a local household, confident that his modern culinary knowledge would translate across millennia. Everything went wrong immediately and spectacularly. The open fire had no temperature control, no timer, no helpful beeping sounds when things were ready. Charlie burned the barley cakes into charcoal discs that could double as roof tiles. He oversalted the fish, using coarse sea salt that dissolved nothing like his fancy pink Himalayan salt at home. He grabbed the wrong amphora and used lamp oil instead of cooking oil, creating a dish that smelled like a burning warehouse. The family's actual cook, a middle-aged man with flour-dusted hands and infinite patience, watched Charlie's destruction of expensive ingredients with barely concealed horror. His smartphone, which might have provided some guidance, died midway through, its battery finally surrendering after 2 days in ancient Athens without a charger. The family tasted Charlie's creation with heroic politeness, chewed thoughtfully for longer than any food should require, and then gently but firmly suggested they would finish preparing the meal themselves while Charlie perhaps rested in the shade. A patient elderly cook named Xanthe, taking pity on this clearly incompetent but enthusiastic stranger, offered to teach Charlie the true foundations of ancient Greek cuisine. She spoke about the sacred trinity that sustained Greek civilization: olive oil, pulses like lentils and chickpeas, and fish from the surrounding seas. Meat, she explained while kneading dough with practiced hands, was a precious luxury reserved for religious festivals and special occasions, not something ordinary people ate regularly. Most Greeks survived on what Charlie would call a vegetarian diet, not because of philosophy or health trends, but because of simple economic reality and environmental limits. Xanth's cooking philosophy centered on simplicity, letting each ingredient speak for itself without elaborate sauces or complicated techniques to hide behind. She showed Charlie how to properly bake barley cakes so they weren't cement blocks, how to dress simple vegetables with good olive oil and herbs, how to salt fish for preservation. Charlie felt his food snob superiority crumbling like feta cheese as he realized these ancient cooks possessed sophisticated knowledge born from necessity, resourcefulness, and deep respect for their ingredients. The great festival honoring Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and very poor decision-making, arrived with drums, flutes, and amphors of undiluted wine flowing with dangerous generosity. Charlie attended with his new Athenian friends, initially planning to observe and perhaps document this historical moment. But peer pressure and festival energy proved stronger than his journalistic integrity. Cup after cup of strong, barely diluted wine passed into his hands, each one accompanied by cheers and toasts to gods whose names he couldn't quite pronounce. The night blurred into a kaleidoscope of torchlight, dancing that his body seemed to know despite never learning singing paeans to Dionysus in phonetic ancient Greek that probably translated to complete nonsense. At some point, he vaguely remembered trying to explain the concept of food trucks to a confused potter, describing Instagram to people who barely had a word for picture, and declaring with absolute wine-soaked certainty that he was from the future and could prove it if someone would just listen. No one was listening. Everyone was dancing, singing, or having philosophical debates that made zero sense but felt profoundly important at the time. Sunlight stabbed through Charlie's closed eyelids like Apollo himself was personally angry at him, and a rooster screamed directly into his ear with the fury of a smoke alarm. Charlie opened his eyes to find himself lying in a stranger's courtyard next to an olive press, covered mysteriously in flower petals and what appeared to be wine stains. An extremely annoyed homeowner stood over him, demanding in rapid Greek to know why there was a madman sleeping beside his expensive equipment. Charlie's head pounded with what might genuinely be the worst hangover in recorded history, spanning 25 centuries of human suffering. As he stumbled to his feet, helpful witnesses from the previous night appeared to fill in the gaps in his memory. Apparently, he had declared himself a prophet, challenged someone to a foot race, and lost badly, and serenaded a stray dog with what he insisted was a song from the future, but which everyone agreed sounded like cats fighting. Charlie now understood with crystal clarity why the ancient Greeks always diluted their wine with water, and why moderation was considered a virtue worth dedicating an entire philosophical principle to. He apologized in broken ancient Greek while nursing humanity's first documented time-displaced hangover. In his final days in ancient Athens, after the festival chaos and cooking disasters and marketplace confusion, Charlie sat with Xanthe sharing a simple evening meal. Just bread, olives, olive oil, and fresh water from a spring. Nothing fancy, nothing elaborate, nothing that would photograph well for social media. Xanth spoke quietly about autarkia, the Greek concept of self-sufficiency and finding contentment with what you have, rather than always wanting more. The ancient Greek diet wasn't about elaborate flavors or impressive presentations or creating the perfect dining experience, she explained. It was about community, sharing what little you had, moderation in all things, and living in harmony with what the land could sustainably provide. For the first time since arriving, Charlie stopped judging the food against his modern expectations and actually tasted it. The peppery bite of good olive oil, the subtle sweetness of sun-dried figs, the satisfying texture of properly made bread, the company of a friend who had shown him patience he probably didn't deserve. In that moment, sitting in the fading light with simple food and complex wisdom, Charlie finally understood what authentic really meant. The amphora, which Charlie had completely forgotten about during his time-traveling adventure, began to glow with soft golden light from across the room, where he dropped it days earlier. Time was calling him home. Charlie said his goodbyes to the friends he'd made, especially Xanthe, who pressed a sealed jar of her finest olive oil into his hands along with a scroll containing her family's recipe for the perfect maza. He hugged her carefully, knowing he'd never see her again, that she'd been dust for thousands of years in the world he came from, that this impossible moment was ending. The amphora's light grew brighter. Colors began to blur and blend, and Charlie felt time rushing forward like a river, carrying him back through centuries and empires and ages. When the spinning stopped and his vision cleared, he was standing in the antique shop, clutching the amphora with the jar and scroll mysteriously still in his hands. The elderly shopkeeper stood in exactly the same position as before, as if no time had passed at all, and looked at Charlie with knowing eyes. "So," she asked with the smallest smile, "did you find what you were looking for?" Charlie sits at a simple wooden table in his studio, filming a new video with completely different energy than his viral rant. Before him, bread, olives, olive oil, and wine, carefully diluted with water, just as Xanthe taught him. He talks to the camera about his research trip, showing the ancient scroll and preparing maza from the recipe, written in faded ink by hands that touched his 2,000 years ago. His tone has transformed from sarcastic and superior to respectful, humble, genuinely enthusiastic about the philosophy behind ancient Greek eating. He raises his cup to the camera in a toast. "Sometimes the best food isn't about complexity or trends or $47 foam," he says softly. "It's about understanding why simple was enough, why it had to be enough, and why that's actually beautiful." Behind him on the shelf, the amphora sits quietly, its job complete, waiting patiently for the next person who wishes a little too loudly for authenticity. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your comfortable bed, perhaps think about Charlie and his journey to a time when dinner was barley cakes and philosophy, when wine flowed too freely at festivals, and when simplicity wasn't a lifestyle choice, but simply life. Our modern obsession with authentic cuisine often misses the deeper truth that ancient people ate what their land provided and made it meaningful through ritual, community, and gratitude. Maybe there's wisdom in that for us, in our world of endless options and complicated desires. And maybe, just maybe, there are other artifacts out there waiting to teach us similar lessons about what we think we want versus what we actually need. If you enjoyed this story, remember to follow for more stories from the world of Charlie's bedtime stories. Sweet dreams, time travelers, and remember to always dilute your wine.